So this is Dr. Garrison Whitaker. He's a co-founder here at ATL Orthopedics, a hand surgeon and partner, and here to talk about our vision and the backstory and how we started this practice here at ATL Orthopedics.
Sort of had the vision for this, and as things go, pinged a lot of us. Some people were interested, and we just started the calls, with about 6 or 7 of us just following his vision, really just bringing representative care back to Atlanta, and I signed on.
Yeah, and this was 2020, obviously all the things that were going on, and and one of the things in orthopedics that, the diversity in especially orthopedics is pretty limited, like a lot of fields, but, if you look at the numbers, there's about 30,000 orthopedic surgeons in the country, and less than 2% are African American, so there's about 600, in the country, so more players in the NFL, as Garrison says, than there are orthopedic surgeons of African American background. So, and again, this is something that's known and talked about, and we talk about our academy, and it's something that people feel like there's nothing that can be done. And so, frankly speaking, I think all of us, the group and the vision was that we're sort of tired of asking, tired of begging and pleading for change, and said, well, what can we do? What's our role in fixing the problem? And so we set out on this journey to essentially create the largest African-American orthopedic practice in the country. So that's people buying into that very early on, and really that message resonating, and it has been part of the really exciting stuff that we're doing, and able to do it here in South Metro Atlanta is pretty powerful, and I think very, very exciting.
Patients, one, they're happy they don't have to drive. A woman came in yesterday and just carpal tunnel, nothing serious. She just, just between transportation, just couldn't get, to Buckhead or further out, and was just happy. It's no different than being in a community, we'll say a Whole Foods. You can drive to Whole Foods, but when one opens up in your community, it just makes it seem, like we've arrived. And that's sort of her response.
A friend of mine says Atlanta is the most important city in the country, urban center, because from a leadership standpoint, from a civil rights history standpoint, it's a community that is, I believe, special, and I think a lot of people feel that way. You see all the influx here, and it's a place where I think there's a lot of opportunity for African Americans to do things with African Americans, and Garrison mentioned it earlier, but we have 2 pillars in the practice. One is this concept of representative care, and the other is innovation and technology, using those 2 things to get patients better outcomes. And, what's true, frankly speaking, is, and there are studies that show this, that, African American patients get better care from African American doctors. They have better outcomes, and whether that's due to better patient engagement or better communication, or just frankly trust, there's a relationship there that can't be easily mimicked, and to have an opportunity to sort of really lean into that is part of our vision and our growth strategy.
Just harping on representative care, my whole thing is sort of just, I once had a patient, and she said I reminded her of her grandson or something like that, and just sort of stuck in my head. And it was sort of like, just imagine being taken care of someone that you remind them of their grandmother, their aunt, their sister. I think that's just important. I think that's what patients connect to, and that might be part of the reason why
the outcomes are better.
Yeah, just because you're seeing someone, not just as a patient, but someone, they could potentially look like your grandmother, your sister, your aunt.
We have this problem, right? Again, there's 600 people that look like us that do what we do in the country. So, getting access to the population like city of Atlanta, where 6 million people and have 50% of the population is African American. How do you actually service those people? And that's really where that second pillar comes in, this innovation piece, and using technology to sort of broaden access. So one of the things that we are focused on, actually working with talking with some schools here in the city about is how do we actually expand access using things like remote patient monitoring. So remote patient monitoring is essentially a way where like everybody's been to the doctor and everyone's been told they need to exercise more. Like everyone's heard that, but you don't necessarily get any instruction on that. And so when you first walk in here, the first thing you see is this sign over here that says exercise is medicine. And we really believe in this concept that and even the logo sort of demonstrates this, and what it's supposed to represent is that if you think about what determines someone's health, about 50% of that is behaviors. So not genes, not environment, or even access to care, but what do they eat, how they exercise, do they smoke? And if you can affect that, you actually have tackled a large percentage of the equation of health. And so we think about, well, how do you actually change behavior? And a lot of times that's related to connection, that we talked about before, but then also getting people to understand that exercise really is a medication that we all have the capability to do to improve their health. And, so we use this remote patient monitoring program, which think of it like a Fitbit, where people can sort of tracks their activity level and their heart rate, and then they actually send this data to us so we can sort of evaluate it when they're not here in the office. And it gives us a way to actually engage and connect with patients and say, hey, look, last week you were great, you got 10,000 steps, this week you're down to 5,000. But we use that as a way, again, for connection as well as to actually drive health outcomes. So the amount of exercise that for adults that is recommended is 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise. Okay, and so that's 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, right? But with that, what's interesting is that if you do that at that level, there are over 40 diseases that are either prevented or treated just with exercising. And we go to medical school, and the first thing you learn in medical school is here are all the diseases, here's how you treat them, like the algorithm for treating them. And pretty much it doesn't matter what it is, diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, the first line of that's always the same, diet and exercise. If you correct those things, you actually can treat those diseases. And I always tell people, it's like, if I told you there's a medicine that exists that, treats over 40 diseases, prevents 8 different types of cancers, lowers your risk for depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, and I say, well, and it's sort of free, it doesn't cost anything, like everyone would want that. They'd be like, yeah, just sign me up. But that's what exercise is. It's just people don't think of it in those terms. So that's the communication part that we use to sort of get people into this remote patient monitoring program and say, hey, look, we need to get you to 150 minutes a week of exercise. The fact is that 1 in 2 adults has a musculoskeletal problem. So even though we think of ourselves as specialists, we are almost like a primary care field. And so the thing that we're serving, especially in a city like Atlanta, travels. And so again, that's really that will be part of our goals, is to expand to different parts of the city for sure.